Hi, and welcome to the introductory session on linguistic anthropology, the series of talks on linguistic anthropology. I'm Dr. Michael Hadson-Thomas, and I'm going to spend some time now just briefing you through our talks and the extensive series of talks that we're going to have. The field of linguistic anthropology I should speak about a little initially before I begin to introduce the series and the subjects that we will be looking at over the next few months. Linguistic anthropology is, we can start by suggesting that linguistic anthropology is a combination of linguistics and anthropology. There have been people who have argued against that linguistic anthropology is all encapsulating, and there is an anthropological linguistics, and there have been people who have been proponents of the fact that there is no articulation, and we'll discuss all that. Anthropology is quite broad, as you would have known from your other courses. There's of course social, cultural anthropology, medical anthropology, cognitive anthropology, and so forth. Linguistic anthropology and anthropology in general are quite closely related in many ways, but the gravity is on the interrelation between linguistics and anthropology. Okay, so all in all, in this series of talks, we have approximately 32 to 35. We will begin by looking at fundamentals, and fundamentals, discussing fundamentals is quite important. But we'll also look at advanced topics, and because most of you here are postgraduate, there are a few undergraduates, you should have some grasp of linguistics and what linguistics is and how linguistics works. And also many of you have looked at anthropology and seen how that works. So we're going to now form that connection and look at how the two work together in all these talks. Now the talks are, some of them are directly related to linguistic anthropology, others are not. And we look at aspects of sociology, linguistics, anthropology, cultural studies, political studies, critical theory, and so forth. And we're going to surely discuss all these subjects, but we're also going to ultimately bring all these back so that they are linguistic anthropology. We're going to forge connections between what we're discussing and linguistic anthropology. Okay, all right, okay. So let's quickly go through some of these. The first talk number one, will be semiotics. Now, semiotics is quite a broad field, and it has been investigated and developed for over a century and a half. I mean, explicitly developed and discussed. But semiotics, the idea of semiotics has been around for centuries, even a millennia or two, and we'll discuss that. But we'll really look at the importance of the field of semiotics and what's been studied to develop the field of semiotics over the past 120 years or so. Now, semiotics is quite broad, so we're not going to pinpoint every little thing in semiotics and expand on it, because that's later on. We're just going to look at the broad field, the broad discipline, which is semiotics, and then later on, at some point, we'll expand on that and expand on the work done by the very important people within semiotics. And there have been many. And it's not just 120 years ago, 100 years ago, but also now there is some pretty good work, very good work done on semiotics. We're also going to connect that to its cosmological framework, and whatever cosmological means, we're going to speak about that and then see how well we can combine the two. Okay, and cosmology is something we're going to frequently refer back to, as it is quite pertinent to the field of the study of anthropology, linguistic anthropology. Okay, so talk number 2 will be conversation analysis and analyzing speech and talk in conversation analysis and in linguistic anthropology. The field of conversation analysis and analysis of speech really took hold or progressed quite strongly in the 1970s, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s. A lot of very important work was done then, and it moved along and got a stronghold on other linguistics, other fields in linguistics, a decade or two after that. And now it's very well accepted as one of the major analyzing frameworks or frameworks of analysis within linguistics, and very pertinent to linguistic anthropology. The first part of what we look at won't be connected to linguistic anthropology, but what we'll see ultimately is that we can connect it, and we will connect it to ways in which we develop our conceptions of linguistic anthropology. And we'll, turn it around, mold it so that we can find common ground. And there's a term I like to use, common ground. Okay, common denominators. Okay, talk number 3 will build, somehow build on from talk number 1, and we'll make some connections. Structuralism. Now I see when I mention the word structuralism, a few of you nod your heads and you grin, and there are people who grin, people who grunt, there are people who nod their heads and smile. There are proponents for structuralism, and there are people who are opponents to structuralism, people who do not agree with structuralism at all. And that's what's happened over the past century or so. There have been people who have really advocated and endorsed and condoned structuralism. There are people who have done the opposite, people who have not been happy with it at all. And we'll speak about all of that. We'll speak about the people who have been facilitative of the field, and people who have not, people who have contested the field quite strongly. Structuralism has been very important, a very important paradigm, and whether or not it has been a legitimate or has been a fruitful discipline or movement, it has done a lot for linguistics, linguistic anthropology. So the bottom line is that it has been central to linguistic anthropology. Okay, and anthropology. Okay, so talk 4 will be data collection and the ways in which we collect data in the social sciences and anthropology and linguistic anthropology. And of course, we'll look at a diverse set of techniques and methods for data collection. We're not going to look at basic theory, because basic theory most of you would have done. So we're going to look at work that is somewhat advanced. We'll look at some work that has been done, and we'll take that as example and build from that. Data collection in anthropology, linguistic anthropology, is very important, and we need to understand that actually data collection is central to a successful work in linguistic anthropology and methodology, because in fact data collection documentation is the methodological framework in linguistic anthropology. Okay, or at least a substantial part. Talk number 5 will build on from talk number 3, and that'll be post-structuralism. Post-structuralism is not necessarily a contestation or defiance of or movement away from structuralism, Rather, it's a building on to structuralism. And of course, we'll discuss that. And we'll look at the important people in the mid to late 20th century, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, who made efforts to push post-structuralism into the fore and to give it its acknowledgement and the acceptance that it needed. And we'll also look at, of course, we'll look at the linguistic anthropological importance of it. Definitely, that's central, but we'll also look at the political, the regional aspects of it, the religious aspects, the sociological aspects, and so forth. Okay. And post-structuralism is, you know, it's quite contested in many ways by groups, but it's also very integrated, ingrained in much of academia today. The social sciences, the humanities, but also the physical and biological sciences, you know, they have taken aspects of post-structuralism into academic thought and integrated that. Okay, talk number 6, we're going to look at applied qualitative research methods and methodology. So, of course, we'll remake that distinction between method and methodology and everything, but we'll also look at the practical side of qualitative research methods in anthropology, linguistics, linguistic anthropology, and we'll discuss how we can integrate that effectively into our work on linguistic anthropology. Okay, talk number 7, we're going to build on from talk number 6, I guess, and talk number 4. Talk number 7 is well, we'll discuss applied ethnography. Now, ethnography is, again, central to linguistic anthropology. It constitutes a large part of the method, and the idea of ethnography constitutes a significant part of methodology in linguistic anthropology and anthropology, of course. And ethnography has a strong ethical dimension, which we'll also discuss, and we'll understand how we can build from that or build to it throughout our work on linguistic anthropology. And ethnography is also something that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of resource, but we'll discuss that. Okay, so talk number 8, we're going to look at discourse theory. Discourse theory is something that developed in the 1960s, 1950s, 1960s, although, you know, it was, developed in the 1960s, 50s, and that was halfway through the 20th century. And although there were ideas about discourse in the 19th century, and they developed, but the 20th century was the time when this and a lot of everything else that we're speaking about gained momentum. The 20th century really gave a lot of these fields momentum. Now, we're going to discuss that the 20th century was quite a fruitful time for linguistic anthropology. And why? Sure, there are reasons why. You know, the 19th, 18th centuries, there were people around. There were Descartes. There were all these people who Hegel and other people who began to develop ideas about where social science and the humanities should go. But, you know, we look at it now, we think that was very simple and very fundamental, but when you're a pioneer, keep in mind that when you're a pioneer, things don't come that easily. You know, inventing is difficult. Copying, of course, is a piece of cake. It's very easy. So these people throughout the 18th and 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th century, they did a lot of significant work, and they deserve a lot of credit for interpolating and extrapolating and working out how these things should be, or how these things make sense. Okay, so discourse theory, following discourse theory, we're going to connect that to something related, or two related topics, and speech number 9, or talk number 9, will be critical discourse analysis, CDA. CDA is quite a popular term, and it's used by its proponents in many ways. And you know, discourse is a contested term, and critical is also somewhat contested. So when you put the two together, the field expands, and it's diverse, and a lot of work has been done on CDA, which we will discuss. And specifically, the work that has been done has been specifically related to linguistics. However, discourse, you know, if you look at Harisian linguistics, Roy Harris and stuff, you realize that actually discourse isn't about linguistics. It's about much more. If you look at Judith Butler, you know, if you look at Foucault, and you know, there's much more than just language. So if we limit our thinking to that discourse is language, then we're heading for trouble. It's not about language. It's about a universal set of elements that work together to produce meaning. Okay, CDA. After CDA, we're going to look at something that's also connected to CDA. Well, it's something I like very much, and something I've spent years on looking at, discursive psychology. And discursive psychology has assisted to springboard CDA, and it was there for a while and did a lot of good for CDA. And it's still, of course, used and acknowledged well, but the fundamentals that have emerged from discursive psychology are undeniably effective for our understanding of discourse and how discourse works, and the dynamics of identity in speech and talk, and the context. Okay, then for talk 11, we'll move back into something central to linguistic anthropology, and that's multifunctionality. And multifunctionality has emerged, has surfaced repeatedly in work on linguistic anthropology, and proponents of linguistic anthropology, linguistic anthropologists and anthropologists confirm that multifunctionality is an element of linguistic anthropology that we should be speaking about or using as an analytical, as a methodological framework. The next talk will be language socialization, and lots of work on that. Lots of work from people around the world, and lots of interest in language socialization, and that's key to linguistic anthropology. The way in which we socialize ourselves and the way in which we've been socialized is key to our development of language practice, language identity, and social identity, of course. And you know, there's been lots of discussion, there have been lots of ideas about whether our society, our cultural environment shapes the way we speak, and vice versa. So we'll look at that. Okay. The next talk we'll look at is something that will build from talk 1, and something that has received a great lot of attention recently, in the past 2-3 decades, indexicality. Now, indexicality is an expanding field, and not just in the field of linguistics, but you know, connected to everything. You know, advertising, psychology, communications, sociology, anthropology, cultural studies. So indexicality, I can think of 2 or 3 very important people, and these people, or you know, 5 or 6 important people, but these people have been working on indexicality for the periods within they've been working on indexicality, but they haven't been all grouped together. There have been people who were around 100, 120 years ago, and of course, for those of you who have studied linguistics, know what I'm talking about and what I'm going to expand on. There have been people who are around now who are doing great work on indexicality, people in the 90s and the 80s, and so forth. So, every 2 or 3 decades, somebody comes along who just, gets it and pushes the whole field of indexicality along. So we have much to be thankful for there, for these people who have shed light and progressed with indexicality. Okay, talk 14, language meaning in anthropology and linguistic anthropology. Language meaning, what does language mean? We're going to look at the meaning of language from a structural perspective, a mechanical perspective, a social perspective, a cultural perspective, a cognitive perspective, and so forth. Okay. Talk number 15, 16, and 17. 15, 16, and 17 are 3 interrelated talks. 15, we're going to look at participation in the language and community. Okay, the language community is a dynamic idea because, there were its origins and it began and the ideas were put forward, but then 2-3 decades, within the 2-3 decades following its finding or initial suggestion, it progressed and found new forms. And the language community, which really emerged in the 60s, 70s, 60s and 70s, has moved along and progressed. So we will discuss the language community in 15. In 16, talk 16, we'll look at the speech community and its connection to communities of practice, which is 17. Okay, so 16, we're going to look at the speech community, which is very closely related to the language community, and many similarities there and almost the same, but there are articulations, and we will discuss articulations. 17 is the idea, the notion of communities of practice, and communities of practice is really where the speech community and the language community have moved and moved into. And communities of practice has given these other 2 dynamics that we will discuss. Okay. And communities of practice, again, is central to ideas in linguistic anthropology. Number 17, talk 17, we will look at language theories. Now, language theories, we have to get a strong understanding of, and a lot of you have spent a few years now looking at language theories and language theory and how that works in analysis and method and building your research. So we're going to, generalize on most and look closely at some and look at how these have been important in other fields such as linguistic anthropology and anthropology, because anthropology does draw on linguistics, general anthropology. So we're going to cover the important ones, and we're going to discuss in detail some very important ones. Okay, and talk number 18, back again to something central in linguistic anthropology, language ideology. Language ideology is, it's something that the researcher uses to develop conceptions of language in the speech community, and it's also something that the researcher acknowledges that comes from the subject, the speech community, the language community, as a way of eliciting views and a certain conception from within, an emic perspective from within, so to better understand, so to better conceptualize what's going on in that speech community. Okay, and a lot of good work has been done in the field of language ideologies. Okay, talk number 19, we're going to shift a little away from linguistic anthropology and look at cultural anthropology. What cultural anthropology is. You know, a lot of work has been done on cultural anthropology, and we're going to look at the distinction between cultural anthropology and social anthropology and, yeah? Right. We'll be looking at the distinction between cultural and social anthropology and you know, and how that's geographically situated and all and everything. Right, yeah. Sure, yeah, okay. Yeah, right. Yeah, okay, yeah, good point, okay. Yeah, we'll be speaking about, of course we'll be speaking about legitimacy, and we'll speak about Levi Strauss and, you know, all these people who have been quite central to cultural anthropology and sure, the Europeans, yeah. No, cultural anthropology is yeah, I agree. You know, it's tricky because it's both central and not central to linguistic anthropology. Linguistic anthropology is a discipline in its own right, but it also has interaction, strong interaction between with other fields like cognitive anthropology and medical anthropology and, you know, archaeological anthropology, I'm sorry. Yeah, we'll be looking at legitimacy. I find that legitimacy in cultural anthropology is very important, especially if you look at post-colonialist regions. And we'll discuss post-colonialism as well. Yeah? Right, yeah. Okay, good point. And actually, you have a point because we will be discussing a lot of what you just asked. So just give me a few minutes and we'll get to that. But you have a very good point. Yeah. Okay, all right, we continue. So cultural anthropological theory. Yeah. I call it theory, but you know, theory, and we're going to look at work as well. So in fact, a lot of what we do, yeah. Okay, I can barely hear you back there. Okay, right, yeah. A lot of what we do is going to mix theory and work. Okay, so, you know, we're looking at the practical, we're looking at praxis, the applied side of things. But, you know, yeah. Okay. So, talk number 20, we're going to look at something that I believe is extremely important in work in linguistic anthropology, because without getting a grasp of grammar, then, you know, analysis becomes haphazard in some way. You know, there's been a schism of sorts between grammar and structural and generative linguistics and linguistic anthropology, and there have been people who have argued for and against this, but I'm a strong advocate of knowing grammar, and I mean, you know, really knowing grammar, knowing about the generative and structural aspects of language and everything. And if you look at great work by, like Alessandro Duranti, for example, and you guys know about Duranti because we've spoken about him in undergraduate courses, and you've seen that his work on the ergative and everything, you know, he's taken grammar and he's done some very significant things with the understanding of grammar. So, you know, we're going to discuss that, and we're going to look at aspects, very important aspects of grammar. We're going to revise them, review them, and then become very clear on what that is and how we can use them in important linguistic anthropological work. And I'll give some great examples, and we'll, you know, do some exercises and stuff, and we'll work out how to do that. You know, some really good work has been done by people who have taken the idea of grammar and how it works and tested it in different communities, or gone to different communities and seeing how it works differently. Okay, and then redescribe society and culture in that way. Okay. Yeah. Yes, he was. Yeah. Yes, he was. Yep. Yep. He's at the University of California, isn't he? Yeah. Los Angeles. Los Angeles. That's where it is. Yeah. That's where the action is. Yeah. I think I had a meeting with him in May at UCLA, and he was telling me that they have don't know if it's a weekly or a monthly or a fortnightly workshop on linguistics, and the great linguists get together in a room or a little a conference room or something, and they present and discuss. Okay, which is a great thing to have. Yeah. Okay.